Welcome to Now We're Getting Somewhere. I'm Katie, and I'm a certified life coach, but I've also been a management consultant at McKinsey and a product manager at a tech startup. In other words, I know what it feels like to have a life that looks pretty good on paper, but doesn't feel as good as I want it to. I help my professional clients develop lives that are more meaningful, happy, and also more successful. And I want to share the same practical insights with you. Let's go. Hello, team. I'm recording this podcast for you, having just gotten home, a couple days ago from my trip to Portugal. If you know a little bit about my family, my husband is Portuguese, and my in-laws, his parents live in Portugal. They lived in the US for a while, and now they're retired in Portugal. And he also has just an innumerable number of aunts and uncles and cousins and second cousins all around. And so we went to go see everybody. And I will say, we went last time 3 years ago, and my kids were 3 at the time. And it was a really tough trip. My in-laws are really, really nice. It's just like getting my kids back and forth. And then, oh my gosh, there's so many things that were hard. One of them was that one of my sons, who has epilepsy, hadn't had seizures in a long time. And then he had seizures while we were in Portugal. And they were in this like way that we'd never seen them happen before. That was actually very scary. And then we had to go to the hospital. It was just, bad. There's so much more to say than that, but you can fill in the blanks. And also my kids just weren't that into like iPads at the time. We do almost no like iPads or small screens just in general. So they weren't like used to them. And then we gave them iPads on the plane, and they just had very little interest in them. So we were just sort of like entertaining these 3-year-olds for many, many hours on flights. But this time, team, we let them use iPads if we have car rides over an hour, or, obviously flights over an hour. And so they've had enough experience that even my son, who has some disabilities, he hasn't been that into the iPad. It's been slowly building. Our last long car trip over spring break, he did use it for like maybe a couple hours, but then seemed to be bored. But this time he used it for like 12 hours straight on our direct flight. And it was heaven for me. And I think honestly for them, I think they loved it. One of my sons literally told me that getting to use the iPad for 12 hours was the highlight of his trip. And I was like, you know what? Amazing. I love that you love that. So I'm just going to say it was so much better than last time. And I am grateful for that. Okay, that's my personal update. A little more personal than usual. Let's get to today's podcast. This morning, as I was meditating, I thought to myself, I've never done a podcast about meditation. And about a year ago, I did a podcast where I gave some pretty detailed instructions on how to journal and how I journal. And a bunch of people told me that it was super helpful for them. So I decided that the time had come to make a similar podcast about meditation. My take is that meditation for a lot of us is something that we kind of know we should do, but it's also something that, frankly, sounds a little hard. Like after going to work and wrangling our kids and paying the electric bill and folding the laundry, we don't want to also have to consciously keep our brain free of thoughts or repeat a mantra or only focus on our breath and nothing else. It just sounds too hard. And the way that I approach meditation feels to me like it has a lot more ease and spaciousness than what I hear a lot of people doing. While it has also provided me with a lot of benefits. And I feel like the form of meditation that I practice is a little bit less commonly talked about. So I wanted to make this episode because I want to talk about it. So to do that, I'm going to do a few things today. First, I want to kick off by just sharing a little bit more about who this episode is really for. Second, I want to share about what I've gotten out of meditation, the benefits that I've personally noticed. Third, I'm going to give very practical instructions, very tactical instructions for what I do. Fourth, I'm going to give some tips for newbies and beginners. And then there's a little fifth section about why I think this form of meditation is particularly good if you are somebody who struggles to know what you want. We're going to do all that. They're all kind of short little mini sections. And then we will call it a day. Okay, so first, who is this episode for? So let me be very explicit. I am not a meditation expert. I'm honestly not even like a super serious meditator. And there's a lot of those in the world. I have not gone on a 3-day meditation retreat or a 10-day meditation retreat or a 3-month meditation retreat. And frankly, I don't really have a lot of desire to do so. But I am a person who meditates, fairly regularly and who feels that, frankly, the very limited meditation that I do, you'll hear it's not super time intensive, provides me with significant benefit. As I mentioned just a moment ago, I put out a podcast episode about how to journal to find clarity about a year ago. And I was worried at the time that it was like too simple or basic. Like, was I saying something too obvious? And then so many people told me over the next couple of months, they like referenced that podcast to me and were like, "Oh, that was really helpful. I did, I was doing the kind of journaling that's actually not that helpful. And your podcast helped me figure it out." So it taught me that this kind of sort of instructional podcast can be really useful. So that's what I'm trying to do today, but with meditation. As you are probably already inferring, this podcast probably isn't for super experienced meditators who already have forms of meditation they love and have very detailed thoughts about how to approach awakening. Though I find that topic very interesting, I am dubious that my current meditation practice is going to lead me to awakening, and that's fine with me. This particular podcast is more geared towards folks who would like to meditate, but either aren't that experienced or they've tried some forms of meditation and they've just found it too hard to stick with. Particularly, this podcast is also for people who maybe aren't like sold on meditation per se, but they find themselves chronically anxious or chronically agitated or chronically tired, or they find themselves doing compulsive behaviors like using screens or sugar or alcohol more than they'd like. That's pretty much a telltale sign that you're kind of chronically agitated, even if you never actually experience that agitation, because you're sort of buffering with one of those things. Meditation kind of helps with a lot of those experiences. So if you're in any of those latter categories, this podcast is for you. Okay, so we just discussed who this podcast is for. Now let's discuss the benefits of some sort of meditation practice. I'm not going to recite statistics or studies for you about how helpful meditation can be. There's certainly plenty of well-researched books on the topic, or you can get ChatGPT to make you a full lit review. And frankly, it's 2026. Most of us know that it can be very useful. What I did want to share briefly is my own personal experience and what I've seen from clients. If you don't know me very well yet, I will say that I am a person who has a lot happening internally. Kind of all the time. Like my brain is going a lot of the time. It's planning and thinking and analyzing. And my body can pretty easily run a little anxious, a little jumpy, a little wound up. The short version of that might be to say that I kind of run anxious. Like it's pretty easy for me to be low level anxious a lot of the time if I'm not thoughtful about that. And since there's so much going on, then that can kind of lead me to be tired too, just so much happening inside of me. So I have found that if I want to not be overwhelmed by anxiety or agitation or whatever it is, I need to be really thoughtful about how I'm caring for myself, and I obviously have a variety of tools to do that. Some form of journaling is really helpful. I found some form of movement or exercise. Obviously, sleep is essential. But I have found over the years that if I can most days do some form of meditation, it also really helps. And when I'm doing it regularly, or honestly, even just after one session of doing it, my felt experience is that knot inside of me releases a bit. I feel a little more grounded. And that is kind of exactly what I typically need, that release, that coming down. So that's really what I'm trying to achieve with so much of my self-care. I mean, obviously, among other things. So for me, that is really kind of why I enjoy and recommend meditation to others. And if I do find that I'm particularly agitated or anxious or tired as I'm sort of moving through my day, and I reflect back on the past couple of days or weeks, and I realize that I haven't been doing a meditation practice, then I'm like, okay, well, Katie, duh. We know why you feel this way. Let's get back to that. And then when I do it again, it helps. So I will also say, so it's sort of, I think that's the main reason why I do it. And then I will also say that I found this practice to be, supportive for many of the other kind of sub issues that I have struggled with myself and coach on frequently. It helps with healing from burnout. It helps with knowing what I want. I find that it kind of helps lower the static that can make it hard to hear what I want. And then also the particular way that I do it, I feel helps me get in better touch with myself, this like, sort of deeper version of myself. I found that it can also be helpful with reducing compulsive behavior, like, eating or using screens in ways that we don't prefer. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about why I think it helps with some of those things as we go. But to call a spade, I do want to say that I don't personally find meditation to be like a cure-all. It's not. Frankly, if we're being honest, I am skeptical of anyone who says that any one thing is a cure-all for the suffering and complexity of the human experience. But I have found that meditation, particularly how I do it, is a really potent tool in my toolkit. It's one that provides me with noticeable benefit, and I have recommended the particular way that I meditate to many clients who have also experienced benefit. So I'm going to recommend it to you, the person who is listening to this podcast as well. Okay, so now that we've talked about the benefits of meditation, I want to shift to the meat and potatoes of this episode. How do I actually meditate, practically and tactically? The first thing I want to say here is that I don't actually personally use the word meditation. Meditation, quote unquote, to me at least, has gotten associated with like slightly stressful feelings. Like my brain begins to feel that the meditation has to happen in a certain way, that it has to be hard to some degree. And I'm aware, as I say this to you, that I titled this podcast How I Meditate, and I've been using the word meditation since we started. I did that because I think that meditation is a concept that many of us are familiar with and bought into to at least some extent. So I always want to start meeting people where they are. And part of that is using language that people understand before introducing my own take. But personally, I use the phrase doing nothing instead of meditation. I call it doing nothing. I will put DN for doing nothing on my to-do list for the day because that is, in my opinion, the best descriptor of what I do. I do nothing. I do nothing for 10 minutes while I lie on the floor. To be even more explicit, I set a timer for 10 minutes and then I lie on the carpet on top of the floor and I just exist, unstimulated with myself. I do not do any funny business with my thoughts. I don't try to repeat a mantra in my head or purposefully keep my head blank of thoughts or intentionally watch my breath or count my breaths or anything at all. I also don't purposefully put anything else into my brain. Like I don't listen to music or a guided meditation. It is true that I try not to be overly focused or identified with my thoughts. I think we could all imagine like 10 minutes of making grocery lists or planning future vacations while lying on the floor. That's not what I'm doing. I'm trying to not be super cognitive for those 10 minutes, though if thoughts arise, they arise. And frankly, they arise every time. And that's fine. Inevitably, like I said, during those 10-minute thoughts are going to arise. I don't make that a problem. I find that as I do this, I will naturally end up noticing my body sensations more than I might in my day-to-day living of my life. And in particular, I find that I will end up noticing my breath quite a bit. I personally just find that noticing my body and my breath become pleasant once I'm not really doing anything. Like it feels nice to notice the inhale and the exhale. It feels relaxing. But I am not gripping that. It's not a should or a have to. And again, sometimes my brain wanders and I have thoughts and I don't worry about that for a second. I've said that a couple times now, but I want to keep saying it because I find that many people who are considering meditation or who have tried and not necessarily loved meditation can get very stressed about the clearing your head of thoughts part that many of us associate with meditation. We're like, my head has to be empty of thoughts. It's the whole thing. And I'm just here to say, you can do that in this very conscious, intentional way if you love doing that, but you also don't have to. I think that I first to my recollection, got this idea for doing nothing as a form of meditation from Martha Beck many, many years ago. She has a book called The Joy Diet. I think it's from that. I always frankly thought that I was doing a thing that wasn't really like true meditation. I kind of thought it was just a quirky Katie thing where I lie on the floor or do nothing for 10 minutes a day. I do a lot of kind of quirky things, so it seemed in character for me. But then I was reading a book by a spiritual teacher whose name is Angelo DeLullo, and he called what I do natural meditation. Oh, I just love that. Natural meditation, as in it allows us to connect with our natural state of being, just being with what is. And we don't necessarily need mantras or koans or intense practices of emptying the mind or counting the breaths or whatever. And in fact, all of that is ultimately just supposed to help us connect with our natural state of being with what is anyway. So we could just start there. And I have looked into this a bit. I will say again, this podcast episode is not for people who are super advanced meditators. It's for newbies or people who want a very doable practice. But based on my, again, very limited understanding of what's out there, this kind of meditation, it turns out, actually does exist in a lot of spiritual traditions. Zen Buddhists, for example, call it just sitting, which is a translation of a Japanese word that I'm about to totally butcher. Okay, I'll butcher it. It's shikantaza, which basically just means just sitting. You just sit. You are alert in the present moment, but you don't have to do all this funny business of explicitly emptying your mind or reflecting on a koan or whatever it is. You certainly could do this doing nothing practice while literally sitting. I assume the Zen Buddhism folks do. That's why they call it just sitting. But team, I love to do it lying down. My back feels so happy when I lie flat on the floor for 10 minutes. It just grounds me. It feels so good. You do you. This is just my recommendation and my experience. So that's what I do most days. I set a timer for 10 minutes. I lie on the floor and I do nothing. Okay, so I've given you now my instructions about what I do. And now, as the fourth thing that we do together, I wanted to share some advice for beginners or people who find meditation in general to be hard. Or maybe somebody who has done meditation before, but you've really only done guided meditations where you have someone who kind of talks you through it. My main piece of advice is this. It is likely that you will feel a little and potentially a lot or extremely agitated when you begin this practice. I'll say that again. It's likely that you will feel a little and potentially a lot agitated when you begin this practice. Agitation, if that's not a word that you've heard a lot, is just like this jumpy feeling in your body, like you could agitate a glass of water by shaking it up. You may feel shaken up if you try to set a timer for 10 minutes and lie on the floor, and that's not something you do regularly. And when I'm giving this practice to clients, which I do with some frequency, I handle this reality in one of two ways. One is I just prepare them. I say, hey, you're likely to feel very agitated in your body, especially for the first few minutes. Because look, many of us are just running around in our lives constantly stimulated. We are watching TV while we run on the treadmill. We are scrolling while we watch Netflix. And this practice, by contrast, is one with no external stimulation. So suddenly you're with yourself and oh my gosh, it is a lot. What will happen, again, to set expectations, is that typically over the course of those 10 minutes, you might start out super agitated, jumpy, but you will most likely feel a significant lowering of your agitation levels by the end of the 10 minutes. And even just knowing to expect that, I find can be really helpful. And of course, again, to set expectations, if you make this a regular practice, it doesn't really take that long before it's mostly not that intimidating most of the time. And it's mostly not that hard to do. It begins to feel like, this release when you set your timer and lie on the floor. It feels relaxing. It feels nice. But if it's your first time or your first few times, then for many people, it's going to feel like a lot. So that is what I do some of the time. I just warn people. I set expectations. But for other folks, sitting with all of that for 10 minutes, it's too much. That's too high of a bar. And I do not make that a problem. For those folks, we start with 5 minutes perhaps, or even, frankly, 1 to 2 minutes. And I want to say this multiple times so it gets through to your perfectionistic brain. Adapting this practice to what is doable for you is not a problem. For many people, even 1 minute unstimulated of being with themselves, that's a lot. That's a big deal to even do that. And if I am being 100% honest, there are times when even being with myself unstimulated for 1 minute is a freaking lot. Sometimes I am so agitated by life that the thought of doing nothing for 10 minutes is intolerable. I simply cannot. And if I get all or nothing-y about the whole thing and insist that it has to be 10 minutes, I'm not going to do it. So for me, and again, yes, even for me, the person who is recording this podcast, there are plenty of times when I will feel agitated and know that doing nothing will help me, but feel completely unable and unwilling to do a full 10 minutes. In those circumstances, I will set a timer for 1 minute. And over the course of that 1 minute, I will feel pretty jumpy at first. But also, what usually happens is that when the 1 minute timer goes off, I will find that I'm still somewhat agitated, but I also feel like, oh, that was kind of nice. Like I feel a noticeable little bit of coming down. And sometimes I stop there. That's all I do. Just 1 minute. Then I move on with my life. And sometimes I will set another 1 minute timer. And then I'll sometimes set a 2-minute timer after that. And sometimes, not always, another 2-minute timer after that. Truly, this is what I'll do if I'm just all wound up, this kind of like series of short timers. And then maybe after those, I mean, if I've done like 6 minutes total by that point, I'll do like a 3 or 4-minute timer. And by then I'm at like 9 or 10 minutes and total, kind of, you do the math here. And my whole nervous system has unwound itself quite a bit. I wanted to share this personal example for 2 reasons. One, to say, I'm not above you. I also get so agitated that the thought of doing nothing for 10 minutes sounds like hell. And I refuse to do it. So literally, I do 1 minute. And then I do another minute. And then 2 minutes. And then 2 minutes. And then a 3 or 4 minute. So when I say, make this work for you, I live that. I have even set 30-minute timers in my life. This practice works and provides noticeable benefit even if you do it that way. So I wanted to say that. I also wanted to share this personal example to give you like a potential alternate template or approach. Maybe, again, you want to do about 10 total minutes, but you just cannot get yourself to do the whole thing at once. Again, no problem. Do it in 1 to 2 minute increments. Great. Do your best. Forget the rest. Okay. We've discussed so many good things. I just have one more final thing to discuss with you. As we close out this podcast, I wanted to share a little bit about why, in my opinion, this version of meditation is particularly helpful if you are someone who wants to get better at knowing what they want. If you are someone who has been around these parts for a while, you know that knowing what you want, or we could just call it, finding clarity, is a huge topic in my work. It's been a big area of personal growth for me personally, and I help many, many people with it. I talk in my clarity work a lot about your inner navigational equipment or your inner compass, and that's just your inner capacity to know what's right for you. This inner navigational equipment is something that we all have. We're all able to feel in our bodies when something is profoundly wrong or profoundly right for us. We've all felt sick to our stomachs at the idea of doing something, or we felt lit up at the idea of doing something else. But many of us, so we can hear it when it's at like a level 10. But many of us are disconnected when that signal is more subtle or when that signal is very complicated. There's just a lot of parts to it that might be in conflict with each other. So just like literal muscles can be strengthened, one big piece of the clarity work that I do is strengthening the muscles of our inner navigational equipment so that we can hear things even at a low volume, or we can sort through complex signals. And I think that this form of meditation does help to strengthen that inner navigational equipment, because you're stripping all external stimulation away and you're just being with yourself. And you're able to notice that twinge in your belly, and you're able to notice whether your breathing is long and slow and deep, or tight and high and fast, or anything in between. You're able to notice really subtle body sensations and follow the threads of your internal experience wherever they lead. And when you've done that for 10 minutes a day in this unstimulated way, it's easier to notice those signals later in the day. Like, oh my gosh, my chest is tight when I think about going to that party, or my belly just fluttered when I thought about that new job opportunity. Like, what does that mean? You're going to notice more subtle things. Versus if you spend your time doing, for example, like guided meditations. I think those are fine and great and have a ton of value too. I'm not saying never do them, but I do think they're not necessarily strengthening the muscle of following the thread of your own self quite as well. And if you are somebody who wants to get better at knowing what you want, I would prefer if, when you're sitting with yourself unstimulated and you feel, an invitation to linger on your breath or linger on your back sensations or linger on your left knee sensations, you do it. I would prefer that you followed your intuitive self rather than doing exactly what the meditation app tells you to do. And I think as you get better at, again, following that thread of yourself wherever it leads, I find that to be really helpful for clarity. Team, that's the podcast. That's what I'm here to tell you about today. I hope that if you have ever felt like, I should really meditate, but it just sounds so hard, I hope you give this practice a try. I hope that if, like me, you've got a lot going on inside in your head, or if you kind of run anxious or agitated or tired, I hope you give this a try. I have found it to be very helpful personally, and I hope that it helps you as much as it's helped me. Talk to you soon, everyone. If you really want to change in a meaningful, lasting way, that's when you need a life coach. Every client I've worked with has had incredibly personalized reasons why they're in the tired or anxious or stuck or uninspired state they're in. Working with me can help you identify those roadblocks, which are usually blind spots that you genuinely cannot see, and implement a profoundly customized, doable plan for overcoming them. I have a very small, high-end, one-on-one coaching practice. If you'd like to be my next client, reach out at katiesiever.com. I'd love to meet you.